The call came just after dark, the kind of hour when a neighborhood exhales and settles into its nightly ritual of dishes, homework, and television murmuring behind thin walls. A man's voice trembled on the line. His child was gone, he said. He did not know what to do. Sirens broke the quiet, blue and red washing over a modest apartment building that looked like any other weekday night in Georgia. Officers moved quickly down a corridor that smelled faintly of bleach and something they couldn't name. A door opened. Silence pressed back. There are scenes the human mind tries to protect itself from, details the memory refuses to carry because their weight distorts everything that comes after. In those first minutes, nothing felt accidental. The air itself felt complicit. A child's absence changes the geometry of a room. It pulls the walls inward and lengthens every shadow. In the hall, neighbors peered out and then withdrew as if the darkness itself had asked them to mind their own business. She had been 10. There had once been a backpack by the couch, a worksheet with simple sums and a sticker star, a photograph with a gap-toothed smile that made teachers soften when they spoke her name. Adults are good at narratives that make sense car trouble. A bad day at work, a misunderstanding that will clear by morning, but a child's silence at bedtime is an alarm no story can soothe. The first officer wrote later that the apartment felt like a place where noise had been removed. Not merely quiet, but stripped of sound, as if the walls had learned to keep secrets. In the hours that followed, a father's account shifted and collapsed, the way a fragile structure does when the first beam gives way. The facts, once gathered, would be simple and unbearable. The questions would be harder. How does a home become a boundary instead of a shelter? How many times can a warning be ignored before it turns into a verdict? And what kind of stillness lives in a person who can pass a child's room and close the door without looking in? It is comforting to believe that monsters announce themselves. It is safer to believe that evil looks like a stranger on a dark road. But that night proved something colder. Sometimes the most dangerous place for a child is the place that should have kept her safe. For years, they lived behind beige walls and drawn curtains, blending perfectly into the quiet Georgia suburb where everyone waved but no one really looked too closely. To the outside world, Emani and Tiffany Moss were just another couple, trying to make it through life's ordinary struggles bills, long shifts, and raising a child. Their apartment was small but clean, the kind of place where neighbors heard laughter on summer nights and smelled dinner through thin walls. It was the picture of simplicity. And in the middle of it all was Emani Gabrielle Moss, a 10-year-old girl with a spark in her eyes that could light up a room. She was polite, curious, and impossibly bright, the kind of student who always asked why instead of just nodding along. Teachers adored her. Classmates said she wanted to be a doctor when she grew up, to help people who hurt. Her father, Emani, worked long hours as a maintenance technician. Tiffany, his wife, stayed home. At first, Tiffany seemed caring. She braided Emani's hair, attended school meetings, and smiled for photos. But beneath that smile, there was something sharp of control that grew more rigid with every passing year. Emani's teachers began to notice small things. She was losing weight, flinching at sudden movements, hiding her hands in her sleeves to cover bruises. When asked, she always said, "I fell," or "I was clumsy." In 2010, someone finally called Child Protective Services. The system moved in, documented the signs, asked questions, and then, just as quickly, stepped back. Tiffany charmed the social workers. She smiled, said everything was fine. The family promised to do better. The file was closed. But behind closed doors, the walls of that small apartment began to close in. The world that once held warmth and promise for a little girl was turning cold inch by inch, meal by meal, silence by silence. And no one outside would notice again. After that final school visit, Emani Moss vanished quietly from every attendance sheet, every cafeteria line, every roll call. No teacher asked where she'd gone. No caseworker came knocking again. Her name simply slipped out of the system like a candle snuffed out in a room that no one realized had gone dark. Inside the small Georgia apartment, life took on a new routine. Emani still went to work. Tiffany stayed home. But Emani no longer laughed, no longer sang, no longer appeared. Her bedroom became a sealed world, a place where curtains stayed drawn, where no one entered except Tiffany. Neighbors began to notice strange things. The blinds always closed. A smell like spoiled food. A man taking out trash late at night. Always alone. But no one asked, because in suburbia, silence is polite. Emani was kept inside, hidden from the world. She was denied school, food, even sunlight. Her small frame weakened day by day, her body shrinking under the cruelty of neglect. Sometimes, Tiffany would leave a plate near the door, a crust of bread, a few grains of rice, then walk away. The girl was no longer a child in her care. She was a burden to erase. By the time Emani's cries grew too faint to hear, even her father had surrendered to Tiffany's control. He watched and did nothing. He told himself it would stop, that maybe Tiffany just needed time, that Emani would be fine in the morning. But the morning never came. When the police later entered the apartment, they found her bed stripped, her walls bare, and the air thick with something unspeakable. On the kitchen counter lay a notebook, its pages covered in drawings, stick figures holding hands, one smaller than the others, smiling. The name Emani written in shaky pencil. It was the last trace of a little girl who wanted to be seen. Days before the call to 911, Tiffany and Eamon made one final, desperate choice. They placed what was left of Emani into a metal trash bin outside. They tried to burn what could never be erased. And when the fire went out, the truth stood there, in the smoke, quiet, blackened, and undeniable. They didn't just take her life, the narrator whispers. They tried to erase the proof that she ever lived. When police arrived that night, Tiffany Moss waited by the curb, trembling, broken, and ash-smudged. He muttered fragments of a confession. "We tried her. I didn't mean for it to happen." Officers led him away and then turned to Tiffany. She stood in the doorway, calm, no tears, no panic, just stillness. Her face was unreadable, like a mask carved from stone. In the police car's mirror, her reflection didn't flinch once. During interrogation, Eamon spoke for hours. He told them everything, how Emani had been locked away, starved, and ignored until she stopped moving. He cried, begged forgiveness, said Tiffany controlled everything. When it was Tiffany's turn, she said almost nothing. No denial, no excuse, just silence. Detectives would later describe that silence as colder than any confession. The case reached the courtroom months later, drawing reporters, cameras, and protesters, demanding justice for Emani. But Tiffany had one last decision to make, one that left the entire court speechless. She refused a lawyer. She would defend herself. The judge warned her. The jury stared. Still, she said nothing. Through the entire trial, Tiffany sat alone at the defense table, motionless, detached, staring at the floor while prosecutors described every detail of Emani's suffering. They showed photos, they read text messages, witnesses cried on the stand. Even Emani, in shackles, couldn't look at her. But Tiffany never turned her head, not once. No questions, no objections, no plea for mercy. When it was her time to speak, she rose slowly, faced the jury, and whispered, "No defense." Then she sat down again. The courtroom fell into a silence heavier than any shout could be. A child's story had been told through others' voices, while the one who should have protected her offered none. The prosecutor closed with a line that froze everyone in place. Emani didn't just starve to death. She was starved of love, of kindness, of a chance to be heard. And now, the woman responsible answers that with silence. The jury didn't deliberate for long. In less than 3 hours, the verdict was unanimous. Guilty on every count. And when the judge asked Tiffany Moss if she had anything to say before sentencing, she simply shook her head. "It was the quietest courtroom we had ever been in," one reporter later said. "Even the walls seemed to hold their breath." The morning of the verdict, the courtroom was packed. Reporters, officers, and strangers who'd followed the story just to see how it would end. Sunlight cut through the blinds, harsh and pale, spilling across the wooden benches like a silent accusation. When the jury filed back in, no one breathed. The foreman's voice broke the air. "We, the jury, find the defendant guilty on all counts." Tiffany didn't move. No tears, no tremor. She stared straight ahead, her hands folded neatly in her lap as if the words were meant for someone else. The judge read slowly, carefully, each word echoing against the marble walls. For the murder of Emani Gabrielle Moss, the court imposes the ultimate punishment. No gasp. No sobs from Tiffany. Only a small nod, as if she had known this moment her entire life. Her husband, Eamon, wept openly at the far side of the room. He turned to the court and said, "I failed her. I failed my daughter." He was sentenced to life without parole, a punishment he said he accepted because I don't deserve freedom. When the officers came to take Tiffany away, she stood quietly, smoothed the front of her prison uniform, and walked between them like someone heading into another ordinary day. One journalist described the moment. She looked more like a woman leaving a library than a courtroom. Outside, rain had started to fall thin, steady, almost cleansing. Reporters spoke into cameras, their voices trembling. A child starved, a mother unmoved, a justice system that arrived too late. But the crowd didn't cheer. There was no sense of victory. Only grief and an aching silence that hung in the air long after Tiffany was gone. Because justice in this story didn't feel like balance. It felt like a memorial. And as the courthouse emptied, the only sound that remained was the rain tapping against glass, the soft rhythm of a world trying to wash away something it could never forget. Justice was served, the narrator murmurs, but no one walked out of that courtroom whole. The courthouse is quiet now. The cameras are gone, the reporters have packed up their notes, and the world has moved on to the next tragedy. But in Lawrenceville, Georgia, there's still a small patch of earth marked with the name Emani Gabrielle Moss. Fresh flowers appear there every few weeks, left by people who never met her, yet somehow feel they did. The story of Emani isn't just a case. It's a mirror reflecting every warning we didn't hear, every sign we ignored because it was easier not to look. Her teachers once said she had the kind of smile that made bad days better. Now that smile exists only in photographs framed in court exhibits, replayed in news archives, and held in the fragile memory of those who tried to save her. Her father remains behind bars, his letters to her full of apologies that will never be answered. And Tiffany Moss, the woman who called herself mother, sits in a cell where silence is no longer a choice, but a companion. Her name is barely spoken now, because in the end this story doesn't belong to her. It belongs to a little girl who should have had a chance to grow up, who should have had birthdays, friends, and dreams to chase, who should have been protected. If love could have saved her, the narrator whispers, she'd still be here. The screen fades to black. Soft piano. A breath between notes. Then a white line of text appears. In memory of Emani Gabrielle Moss, 2003, 2013. Silence follows. Not empty, but sacred. The kind of silence that reminds us why these stories must be told. Because somewhere, another child might still be waiting to be heard.